The ocean stretched endlessly before them, a mirror of black glass reflecting a canopy of stars. A faint, rhythmic hum emanated from the Nautilus 8, its engines tuned for the descent into the abyss. Dr. Elena Markov leaned against the observation deck's reinforced glass, her sharp eyes fixed on the horizon. The marine archaeologist's breaths were slow, deliberate, as if she could inhale the vast mysteries below. "Still brooding, Captain," said Marcus Valdez, the team's sonar technician, his voice edged with dry humor. A compact man with quick hands and an irreverent streak, Marcus had been invaluable in translating the encrypted SOS that had brought them here. "I'm thinking," Elena replied curtly, not looking away. "Thinking or worrying?" Marcus pressed. "There's a difference, you know." She finally turned to face him, her sharp features softened by the dim light. "Both. That signal shouldn't exist, Marcus. The K-104 Leviathan was declared destroyed 40 years ago. And yet here we are." Marcus held up his hands in mock surrender. "Fair enough. But come on, you have to admit, this is history in the making. A Cold War relic, sending a signal from the Mariana Trench? It's the kind of thing they make documentaries about." Elena smiled faintly. "Documentaries don't show the things that go wrong. Let's hope we don't give them a reason to start filming." The briefing room hummed with subdued tension as the crew gathered around a holographic projection of the submarine. A skeletal outline of the K-104 Leviathan hovered in midair, its once proud silhouette scarred by decades of decay. Elena stood at the head of the room. Her voice, calm and commanding, cut through the murmurs. "We have two objectives. First, confirm the condition of the submarine. Second, determine the source of the signal." "Let me guess," muttered Lewis Kane, the team's mechanic and deep-sea engineer. "That signal doesn't just happen to be a friendly hello." "You're right," Elena said, unfazed. "The signal is an SOS, but there's an anomaly. It's interspersed with high-frequency bursts that don't match any known transmission protocol. It's not entirely human." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Dr. Haruto Ishikawa, the team's biologist, adjusted his glasses. "Not human? Are you suggesting interference? Or perhaps a natural phenomenon?" "That's what we're here to find out," Elena said. "The K-104 went missing during a classified mission in 1985. Whatever they were doing down there, it ended in catastrophe." Lewis crossed his arms. "And now we're going to poke at it." "Carefully," Elena corrected. "If anyone feels unfit for the mission, speak now. I won't hold it against you." No one moved. "Good. Gear up. We deploy in 1 hour." The descent began with a whisper of hydraulics and the steady thrum of engines. The Nautilus 8, a state-of-the-art exploration vessel, was designed for extreme depths. Its titanium hull and advanced AI systems were unmatched, but even those couldn't fully quell the unease that gripped the crew. Through the reinforced windows of the submersible pod, the world outside grew darker with every passing moment. The blue of the shallows faded to inky black, broken only by the occasional flash of bioluminescent creatures drifting like wraiths in the void. Haruto stared out into the abyss, his scientific curiosity at war with an instinctive dread. "It's strange, isn't it? This part of the ocean is less explored than the surface of Mars." Marcus glanced up from his console. "Yeah, and for good reason. People weren't made to be here." Lewis, securing a toolkit nearby, snorted. "Then why are we?" "To learn," Elena interjected. Her voice, though steady, carried an edge of anticipation. "To uncover what's hidden. If we always gave in to fear, we'd still be living in caves." The Nautilus shuddered slightly as it passed through a thermal gradient, the temperature plummeting. On the sonar screen, faint shapes began to take form, jagged, unnatural outlines that didn't belong. "There it is," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The K-104 Leviathan loomed ahead, a monolithic shadow against the ocean floor. Its hull was intact, but time had exacted a cruel toll. Sections were draped in a carpet of black, spongy growths that seemed to pulse faintly in the submersible's lights. "What the hell is that?" Lewis muttered. Haruto leaned closer, frowning. "It looks organic. I'll need a sample to be sure." Elena ignored the growing tension and focused on the task at hand. Marcus scanned for entry points. The sonar technician's fingers danced over his console. There's a breach near the aft hatch. Looks stable enough to enter. Good, Elena said. We'll send a drone to scout first. As the drone was deployed, its camera feed flickered onto the main screen. The footage revealed an interior eerily preserved. Consoles frozen in mid-operation, chairs bolted to the floor. The air inside appeared strangely clear, undisturbed by the passage of time. Then the feed glitched. For a brief moment, the screen filled with static interspersed with flickering images, distorted shadows, flashes of movement, and the faint outline of a human face, its features stretched unnaturally. What was that? Haruto asked, his voice tight. Marcus swore under his breath. Just interference, I think. Elena's jaw tightened. Marcus, keep monitoring. Everyone else, prepare for entry. As the crew suited up, the tension was palpable. The submarine seemed to radiate a presence, an oppressive weight that pressed against the walls of the Nautilus. Before they departed, Marcus called out, Captain, one last thing. The signal, it's getting stronger. Elena hesitated, her gloved hand resting on the hatch release. Define stronger. It's adapting, like it knows we're here. The room fell silent. Then let's not keep it waiting, Elena said, steeling herself. The hatch opened with a hiss, and the first team descended into the belly of the K-104 Leviathan, unaware of the horrors waiting within. The air inside the K-104 Leviathan was heavy, an oppressive, metallic tang that clung to every breath, as if the submarine itself resisted their presence. Elena adjusted the light on her helmet, its narrow beam slicing through the eerie half-darkness. Behind her, Haruto, Marcus, and Lewis moved cautiously, their boots echoing against the corroded steel floor. Stay close, Elena said softly. Her voice was steady, but her pulse hammered in her ears. This isn't a sightseeing tour. Haruto's voice crackled over the comms. The air quality is strange. High oxygen content, but something feels off. Almost like it's been curated. Curated? Lewis muttered. Well, like someone's been keeping house down here. Before Haruto could respond, Marcus's helmet camera swung to the side. Captain? I've got a visual. They stopped in unison, their helmet lights converging on a bulkhead ahead. The beam illuminated rows of desiccated human remains, seated upright along the walls like silent sentinels. Skeletal hands clutched at decayed uniforms, their hollow eye sockets filled with crystalline growths that glittered faintly in the dim light. Oh my God, Haruto breathed. He knelt beside one of the bodies, his gloved hand hovering hesitantly over its chest. They didn't decompose naturally. The crystallization, it's almost biological. Lewis grimaced, his hand tightening on the grip of his plasma cutter. Biological or not, this isn't natural. What the hell happened to these people? Elena studied the corpses, her mind racing. The crew's positioning wasn't random. They were arranged in a rough semicircle, facing an empty space on the floor. A faint, almost imperceptible hum resonated in the air, emanating from somewhere deeper within the submarine. Keep moving, she ordered. We'll figure this out later. The team advanced, their footsteps careful and deliberate. The submarine's interior was a labyrinth of tight corridors and rusted machinery, the faint glow of the crystalline growths casting shifting shadows on the walls. Every so often, they passed more bodies, all posed in the same unsettling manner, sitting upright, their eyeless faces staring at nothing. Captain, Marcus said, his voice low. This place, it feels wrong. Like we're being watched. You're imagining things, Elena replied, though her own nerves were fraying. Focus on the mission. The team entered what had once been the mess hall. Tables and chairs were scattered haphazardly, as if abandoned in a rush. On one table lay a journal, its leather cover cracked with age. Elena picked it up, careful not to disturb the delicate pages. The handwriting was in Russian, spidery and frantic, interspersed with sketches of strange symbols. What does it say? Lewis asked, peering over her shoulder. Elena flipped through the journal, her expression darkening. It's the captain's log. He talks about finding something on the ocean floor, a black obelisk covered in symbols. They brought it aboard, and that's when things started happening. Things? Haruto prompted, his voice uneasy. Hallucinations. Nightmares. The crew turned on each other. He thought the obelisk was alive. A heavy silence fell over the group. Great, Marcus muttered. So we're dealing with a haunted submarine and a cursed rock. Fantastic. Elena closed the journal, her jaw tight. Let's keep moving. Whatever this obelisk is, it's connected to the signal. We need to find it. The reactor room loomed ahead, its door partially ajar. A faint light pulsed from within, casting an otherworldly glow into the corridor. Elena signaled for the team to stop. Haruto, Lewis, with me. Marcus, stay here and monitor the comms. Marcus gave a mock salute. You got it, Captain. Just don't bring anything creepy back with you. Elena ignored him and stepped into the reactor room. Her breath caught as her light fell on the obelisk. It was taller than a man, its surface a seamless black that seemed to drink in the light. Strange runes glowed faintly along its edges, their patterns shifting like liquid. The hum they'd felt throughout the submarine was louder here, resonating in their bones. Haruto approached the obelisk, his scientific curiosity overpowering his fear. It's beautiful, he whispered, his hand reaching out toward the surface. Don't touch it, Elena snapped, pulling him back. We don't know what it's capable of. Lewis, standing guard near the door, shook his head. I don't like this, Captain. We should leave it and get out of here. We can't, Elena said firmly. This is what we came for. We need to understand it. As she spoke, the obelisk's glow intensified. The hum shifted in frequency, a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to pulse in time with their heartbeats. The crystalline growths on the walls began to shimmer, their light dancing in sync with the obelisk. And then the whispers started, faint at first like the rustling of leaves, then louder, distinct words in a language none of them recognized. Haruto clutched his head, his face contorted in pain. Do you hear that? It's inside my mind. Elena gritted her teeth, fighting the pressure building in her skull. Stay focused. It's trying to disorient us. Lewis backed away from the obelisk, his plasma cutter raised. Disorient us? It's trying to kill us? The whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar. The lights on their helmets flickered, plunging the room into chaos. In the strobe-like flashes, shadows twisted and stretched, taking on grotesque, humanoid forms. Marcus, what's happening? Elena shouted into her comm. Static crackled in response, followed by a distorted version of Marcus's voice. Leave. It doesn't want you here. Marcus? Elena called again, but there was no answer. The obelisk's glow became blinding, its hum reaching a fever pitch. Haruto collapsed to the floor, convulsing, his screams drowned out by the noise. Lewis grabbed him and began dragging him toward the door. We have to go now? Elena hesitated, torn between retreating and trying to understand what they'd unleashed. But the growing madness in the room left her no choice. She followed Lewis, her heart pounding as they stumbled back into the corridor. Marcus was gone. His helmet camera lay on the floor, its feed static. The shadows on the walls seemed to ripple, alive with malice. Elena turned to Lewis, her face grim. We're not alone down here. The corridor stretched ahead like the gullet of some ancient beast, the walls slick with moisture and streaked with glowing, crystalline veins. The faint hum of the obelisk echoed through the submarine, growing louder as if it had seeped into the very metal of the hull. Elena, Lewis, and Haruto moved quickly but cautiously, their helmet lights casting jittery beams that did little to pierce the oppressive darkness. Where the hell is Marcus? Lewis growled, his voice sharp with anxiety. He adjusted his grip on the plasma cutter, his knuckles white beneath his gloves. Elena scanned the corridor, her mind racing. He wouldn't leave his post without a reason. He didn't leave, Haruto muttered, his voice barely audible. He was pale and unsteady, his breath coming in short gasps. The obelisk, it took him. I can feel it. Feel it? Lewis shot him a glance. What does that even mean? Haruto, are you okay? Haruto shook his head, his hands trembling. It's in my mind. Whispers, images. It's like it's showing me something, but I don't understand. Keep it together, Elena said, her tone firm. She placed a hand on Haruto's shoulder, trying to anchor him. We'll get out of this. Just stay focused. A sudden clatter echoed down the corridor, freezing them in place. The sound came from the direction of the mess hall they'd passed earlier. Elena raised her hand, signaling for silence. Did you hear that? Lewis whispered. Elena nodded, her heart pounding. She motioned for them to follow as she moved cautiously toward the source of the noise. The mess hall was as they'd left it, tables and chairs scattered, the journal still resting where Elena had placed it. But the air was different now, charged with a sense of watchful malice. The shadows along the walls seemed to shift, coalescing into vague, humanoid shapes before dissolving back into the darkness. Elena gripped her flashlight tighter, refusing to let her fear take hold. We're not alone, she said, her voice low. No kidding, Lewis muttered, his plasma cutter sweeping the room. As they stepped deeper into the mess hall, the shadows began to move more deliberately, slipping along the edges of their vision. Haruto stumbled, clutching his head. It's getting stronger. It's like it's pulling me. Before he could finish, one of the shadows lunged from the corner, its form solidifying into a grotesque figure. Its limbs were elongated and twisted, its face a featureless void that radiated a sense of primal terror. Contact! Lewis shouted, firing his plasma cutter. The bolt of energy struck the figure, causing it to writhe and shriek before dissolving into black mist. But the attack seemed to awaken the others. Dozens of shadowy figures began to emerge from the walls, their movements jerky and unnatural. Fall back, Elena ordered, grabbing Haruto and pulling him toward the exit. Lewis covered their retreat, firing shot after shot as the creatures swarmed closer. They barely made it into the corridor before the shadows surged forward, their clawed hands raking against the walls. Elena slammed the bulkhead door shut, the metallic clang echoing down the passage. She spun the wheel to lock it, her chest heaving. What the hell were those things? Lewis demanded, his voice trembling. I don't know, Elena admitted, her mind racing. But they're connected to the obelisk. It's like it's protecting itself. Haruto slumped against the wall, his face pale and drenched in sweat. It's not just protecting itself. It's expanding. Those things, they're part of it. Elena crouched beside him, her eyes searching his face. Haruto, what are you saying? Do you know what's happening? He nodded weakly. The whispers, they're not random. They're a message. The obelisk isn't just a thing. It's alive. And it's growing. Those shadows, they're its way of spreading. If we don't stop it, it won't stay here. Lewis stared at him, disbelief etched across his face. You're saying this thing could get out? Onto the surface? Haruto nodded again. It's already trying. That's why it sent the signal. It wants to be found. Elena stood, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. We can't let that happen. We need to destroy it. How? Lewis asked. You saw what it did to Marcus and those shadows. We can barely hold them off. Elena's jaw tightened. There's still power in the reactor. If we overload it, we can take the obelisk out along with the submarine. Haruto looked up at her, his expression pained. That could work, but the shadows won't let us get close. They're getting stronger. Then we'll distract them, Elena said. Lewis, you and I will head to the reactor and set the overload. Haruto, you stay here and monitor the obelisk. If anything changes, let us know immediately. Wait, what? Haruto protested. You're leaving me alone? We don't have a choice, Elena said firmly. The longer we wait, the stronger it gets. We need to act now. Haruto swallowed hard, but he nodded. Fine. Just be careful. Elena placed a hand on his shoulder. You too. She turned to Lewis, her expression resolute. Let's move. As they headed toward the reactor, the faint hum of the obelisk grew louder, resonating through the walls like a heartbeat. The shadows seemed to press closer, their malevolence palpable. This is suicide, Lewis muttered, his voice barely audible. Maybe, Elena replied, but it's the only way to stop this. Ahead, the reactor room loomed, its door half open. The light inside flickered erratically, casting ominous shadows on the walls. Elena took a deep breath and stepped forward, knowing that whatever awaited them, there was no turning back. The reactor room was a cathedral of rust and ruin, its machinery wheezing with age yet still alive, pulsing with a low, mechanical hum. Elena and Lewis stepped inside, their movements slow and deliberate. The shadows seemed to recoil at the threshold, but lingered just beyond, writhing and undulating as if testing the invisible boundary. Elena pointed toward the control console on the far side of the room, its surface coated in grime, but still faintly glowing. That's it. If we can bypass the safety protocols, we can overload the core. Lewis nodded, his plasma cutter raised. You work on the console. I'll cover you. Elena approached the controls, her fingers trembling slightly as she wiped away years of filth. The interface was ancient, its Cyrillic labels nearly worn away, but she'd studied enough Russian to navigate it. Her fingers danced across the keys, bringing the system online. The reactor's core status flickered onto the screen, its output dangerously close to redlining even at its current settings. Looks like this thing's been on life support for decades, she muttered. Can you overload it? Lewis asked, his eyes scanning the room for movement. Yes, but it'll take time. The safeguards are stubborn. She began typing furiously, bypassing one failsafe after another. Behind her, Lewis shifted uneasily. The shadows outside the room pressed closer, their movements more aggressive. One of them surged forward, testing the threshold, and was repelled by a sudden burst of light from the reactor core. They're getting bolder, Lewis said, his voice tight. Elena didn't look up. Just hold them off a little longer. Back in the corridor, Haruto paced nervously, his hand clutching his helmet as the whispers grew louder. The obelisk's glow was intensifying, the shifting runes on its surface pulsing in patterns that seemed to crawl into his mind. He activated his comm. Elena, something's happening. The obelisk, it's reacting to you. The whispers are stronger. Elena's voice crackled through the static. We're almost there. Just hang on. The shadows around the obelisk began to coalesce, their forms more distinct now. They weren't just humanoid. They were grotesque parodies of the crew, their twisted faces frozen in expressions of terror. Haruto backed away, his breathing shallow. Elena, it's creating something. I think it knows what you're trying to do. Inside the reactor room, the console emitted a warning tone, and Elena swore under her breath. Almost there, she said, sweat dripping down her face. Lewis fired another shot at the threshold as one of the shadows breached the barrier. The bolt struck the creature, but it didn't dissolve like the others. Instead, it split apart, reforming into two smaller figures that advanced with eerie precision. Elena! Lewis barked. Just a few more seconds, she shouted back. The reactor's hum rose to a deafening pitch as the final failsafe disengaged. A countdown appeared on the console. 3 o'clock. 2:59. 2:58. I've said it, Elena said, stepping back. We've got 3 minutes to get out of here. Lewis fired at another shadow, his shots growing desperate. We're not making it back the way we came. They've cut us off. Elena's eyes darted to a maintenance hatch in the corner of the room. There's another way. It should lead us to the aft escape pod. Let's move. In the corridor, Haruto's comm crackled again, but this time, the voice wasn't Elena's. It was distorted, guttural, yet unmistakably Marcus. Haruto, don't fight it. Let it in. It's so much bigger than us. Haruto froze, his hands trembling. Marcus? Where are you? I'm here, the voice said, and one of the shadowy figures stepped forward. Its features shifted, becoming a twisted version of Marcus, his face contorted with pain and ecstasy. It wants you to see, the figure said. It wants you to understand. Haruto took a step back, his mind a storm of fear and confusion. But before he could react further, the obelisk flared with light, and the room around him dissolved into chaos. Elena and Lewis crawled through the maintenance shaft, the confined space forcing them to move single file. The metal beneath them vibrated with the reactor's rising energy, the countdown ticking louder in their helmets. Are you sure this leads to the escape pod? Lewis asked, his voice strained. It has to, Elena replied, though doubt gnawed at her. They emerged into a small chamber where the escape pod waited, its sleek, cylindrical body a stark contrast to the decayed submarine. Elena ran to the controls, her fingers flying over the keypad. Come on, she muttered. The pod's hatch hissed open, and she turned to Lewis. Get in. As he climbed inside, a shadow darted into the chamber, its form more solid and menacing than any they'd encountered before. Elena grabbed her plasma cutter, firing a burst that slowed the creature, but didn't stop it. Go, she shouted, shoving Lewis further into the pod. What about you? He protested. I'll be right behind you, she lied. The shadow lunged, and Elena fired again, buying herself just enough time to hit the launch sequence. The hatch sealed, and the pod's engines roared to life, propelling it upward. Elena turned to face the shadow, her back against the bulkhead. The reactor's countdown echoed in her ears. 0:30. 0:29. The shadow loomed closer, its featureless face mere inches from hers. And then, in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, it whispered, You cannot destroy what is infinite. Elena's lips tightened into a grim smile. Watch me. She grabbed a nearby pipe, tearing it free from the wall. Sparks flew as she swung it at the creature, forcing it back toward the reactor room. The obelisk's hum grew deafening, its light piercing through the walls. With a final, defiant scream, Elena hurled herself at the obelisk, the reactor's timer hitting 0. From the safety of the escape pod, Lewis watched as a blinding light erupted from the depths of the ocean. The shockwave rattled the pod, and for a moment, he thought it might be pulled back into the abyss. But then the light faded, leaving only darkness and the faint outline of the surface above. Elena, he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. The comm crackled, but there was no response. As the pod broke the surface, Lewis stared out at the endless expanse of water. He was alive, but the cost of survival weighed heavy on him. And in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that the obelisk's whispers weren't gone. They were waiting,